Hi, everyone. We are live, and we are also just a few minutes late, but hopefully that's not a big deal. I'm Debbie Schwartz, and I'm here today with Rebecca Chabro. I'm just going to wait to see. Oh, I see a few people starting to watch and sign on. So if anybody is watching, if you can just post a comment, making sure, I like to make sure you can hear us. Hopefully now you can see us. And then after all of that technical stuff, tell us where you're from and how many kids you have. And most likely, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of families that are watching tonight with juniors, but tell us, if you've got a junior, if you've got a freshman, if you've got a sophomore, we want to hear all of that. Hi, Betsy. I see your hi. So nice to see you. So good to see everybody. Angela's back on. We were just with Angela an hour ago, but glad to see you're here. Great. Lots of people from all over the place. Okay. So let me just tell you one quick thing before we get started. This is a great presentation. There is a lot of solid, good information in here. And I only say that, don't be afraid that there's a lot of numbers because Rebecca's going to summarize what the numbers mean. Sometimes people get scared when there's too much numbers. The second thing is this is recorded. So you can come back and watch again. You might want to watch again because there's going to be a lot of information here. So you might want to kind of watch again with your students, with somebody else, take notes. And the last thing I will say, and I don't know how people are watching, sometimes you can watch on your phone, but I would honestly recommend maybe you kind of want to sit in front of your laptop just to get a bigger screen because we're going to show you a lot of stuff and it's going to get squished on a small iPhone or, Android phone. So just making my recommendation so you guys get the most out of the information here. And we're going to get started because we also have a lot of information. Actually, I have one more quick bit of housekeeping. Put your questions in the chat. I'll try and scroll through and find them as much as possible. And I'm just going to start to share our screen. So tonight we are talking about, let me share the screen and then, the topic will come up. Okay, so tonight is about COVID's impact on college admissions. I'm sure you guys have seen a lot of information in the news these days, lots of application numbers going up. Rebecca's going to go through all of that. And she'll introduce herself, but I'll just tell you quickly that Rebecca is Director of College Counseling at Linden Hall, which is a private boarding school in Pennsylvania, but she'll tell you more about her background. I just want to share one more thing before we get into the meat of it, and I pass it over to Rebecca. For those of you who don't know, we actually have a service called the Road to College Concierge Service. We've been actually really low key about it. We've actually had it for about 2 years, and we always share free information. So hopefully you guys know that we'll continue to do that. But for people who want even more in-depth information, and if you like what you hear tonight, because this is just a sampling of the type of stuff that we do in the concierge service, then I just want you to know that option is available. We only open it up 2, sometimes 3 times a year. And this is the time of year that we're going to open it up. So I'm just putting that out there that as you listen tonight, this is just kind of the tip of the iceberg of the type of stuff that we do in that concierge service. And I'll tell you about it more. Okay. So, whoops. Rebecca, are you there? Sorry, I got lost. Okay, sorry. I got lost in my own computer. Okay. So Rebecca, I'm going to pass it off to you. I will do the slides. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about yourself, and then we can.
Okay. Yeah. So my name's Rebecca Chabro. As Debbie said, I'm the Director of College Counseling at Linden Hall, which is the oldest all-girls boarding school in the United States. We're located in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Beautiful town. And then prior to that, I have worked extensively in various different high school settings. I started my career off working in a public high school in northern New Jersey, just outside New York City. It was a medium school, a lot of students from all different socioeconomic backgrounds, first-generation students, things like that. And then I went abroad and worked in Barcelona for 2 years. So I worked in an international school there, which was an IB school as well, so an international baccalaureate school. World School. So I'm very familiar with that curriculum and international student needs. and the UK admissions for that matter. Then I moved back and I worked for an independent college counseling company outside of DC, where they are the premier college counseling company there and very pricey. And I learned best practices there, which I've used and implemented in my job since. I have, after that, went down to North Carolina and worked at a Jewish boarding school there. So I understand religious schools and the environments there, as well as boarding and more international students. After that, I ended up working in graduate admissions for a year at a small online graduate school. And so I learned a lot of behind the scenes admissions things. And then I ended up getting a job at Linden Hall, where I am now. So I've had a lot of different college counseling experience in pretty much almost every type of high school setting you can think of. So that, helps me understand what's going on. So yeah, great. So tonight we are going to talk about what's been going on this year in college admissions. Obviously, there have been a lot of big headlines. I've kind of summarized those headlines because there's just too many to bring them all in. But tonight we're going to be talking about the drop in undergraduate enrollment, and then where those numbers are coming from, why those numbers have dropped, and what populations they're dropping from, and what the implications are for the drop in enrollment. Test optional, college is going test optional. That's been a really big movement for years, and we're going to talk about how that has changed within this past year and the impact that is going to have on the future. And for many of you, I understand that a lot of these things that we're going to be talking about tonight are really mostly impacting the current senior class, and most of you are not parents of seniors, but it's good information to know, to understand where college admissions is right now and to move forward with that information. And some of it will apply, some of it won't. But test optional is something that probably everything we're going to talk about is going to probably continue on and play the most impact in the future. We're going to look at the application numbers for this year and how they've reached record highs at a lot of the top universities and what implications that has. And then we're going to talk about buyers and sellers, which is terms that Jeff Salingo, who's the New York Times expert in college admissions, he wrote a book recently and he talks about this concept. We're going to go into that a little bit more and talk about how even though record numbers of applications are coming into those highly selective schools, there are still a lot of really fantastic options out there that are attainable for students.
Oops, sorry. Okay.
All right, great. So this year, obviously due to COVID, there has been a drop of enrollment. So overall for four-year colleges, there's been a 2.5% drop of enrollment according to the National Student Clearinghouse. But really where the majority of that drop of enrollment has been in that first year class. So when we say immediate enrollment, that's high school class of 2020, so students who graduated this past spring and decided basically not to immediately enroll in college this fall. So those entering numbers have gone down quite dramatically, as you can see, 22%. That 22% changes depending on the demographics. So the lower income areas have definitely been hit the hardest, which makes sense because lower income families have been disproportionately affected by COVID and the pandemic and the loss of jobs and the health impact there. And so you can see where they may not have had that, the money to go to college where they might have before. But still 17% decrease in high income high schools is still a significant, decrease and something to look at and what that means. And so there's different reasons, the students who come from those higher income high schools might not want to spend all that money on an experience that won't be that first year experience that they would have gotten otherwise, and they'll take gap years, and we'll look into those implications in a little bit. Once again, so the high minority and low minority schools do correlate a lot to those low income and high income schools, so you can see the correlation there. I thought it was interesting. I couldn't quite explain it, but 25% drop in urban high schools, which does make sense because that's going to correlate with the high minority and the low income high schools. I honestly am a little surprised that the rural high schools had the lowest and that the suburban high schools were in the middle, just because I tend to think of rural areas also sometimes struggling to have resources, but those are the numbers. I don't have answers for everything, but I'll try to give you my thoughts on a lot. So, all right. So if we're looking into what that means and the implications of those, there we go. So before we look on the left side of the screen, if you take a look at the right side with the green, you'll see there's not many colleges who've been very transparent with what these what the students taking gap years and deferring their admissions means to this year's class. So when I say defer, when you get offered a spot at a school, almost every college is going to allow you to defer for a year. And that is, you go and say, I want to take a gap year, or I want to work, and you ask them and they say, okay, great, we will hold a spot for the following year. Hold on one second. Let me take this. I just had another workshop before this, so my throat's a little dry. Okay. So you can see in the middle column for the schools, and like I said, most colleges are not very transparent. Dartmouth has typically 30 to 40 students taking a gap year per year. This year they had 194 request a gap year. Yale typically has 51. This year they had 341. Penn usually, University of Pennsylvania typically has 50. This year they had around 200. So you can see that's 5 times the normal amount. And they all have different responses as to what that is going to mean. So we're still, a lot of the stuff we just don't know yet because it's playing out in real time. But Dartmouth said it's too soon to assess how it's going to impact. Yale said that they have no plans to reduce the number of students that they were taking in this year, even though 7 times the amount decided to take a gap year. But Penn was really transparent in saying that's 150 more seats that will be filled this year than a typical year. And that is going to eat into their regular decision or into their acceptance numbers for this year. And so I really did appreciate that from Penn. I would love to think that Yale is telling the truth with that, and hopefully they are. I don't know how they're going to create that many more seats available because ultimately these schools are so highly selective that I'm sure that when those students took a gap year, they were able to fill their classes with students on the wait list. They are that desirable. So I don't know quite where they're going to have the room for those students. This is something where these are the only 3 schools I could really find the data on, which shows how secretive a lot of colleges are being about this. But if we look at the University of Pennsylvania numbers, just to really understand what this means. So 150 students more asked for a gap year, right? So that's in addition to the 50 that already did. I want you just to be aware, I actually edited this slide, not realizing that Debbie was going to be running the slideshow. So I did include these numbers. So I'm going to cite slightly different numbers than are on the screen here because I recalculated. So that's 150 students plus the 50 typical students that are deferred, right? So that's 200 students that deferred this year. Plus, looking at their early decision data from this year so far, they accepted 1,194 students through early decision. So that totals 1,394, not 44. And that actually ends up being 58%, not 56% of the typical spaces. So they typically say they enroll a class of about 2,400. 56% of those spots are already taken. So that now remains 1,056 spots. Actually, it's 1,006 spots, not 1,056. Sorry, I had the miscalculation here. So 1,006 remaining spots for about 48,000 applications that they've reported have come in through regular decision. So their acceptance rate, their regular decision acceptance rate is likely to be, at least this is implying, all these numbers are implying, it's going to be about 2%. So these deferrals have definitely impacted that. And that was something I put out a statement, which was not the most popular statement back in the spring, encouraging students to stay with college, staying with their initial plans for college, just because it was going to impact things for the grade below them. Now I'm seeing that playing out. So we'll see how it plays out. But this is part of the reason there's a lot of frenzy this year, because there's going to be such low acceptance rates for some of these colleges. Okay, so another big thing that happened this year, and we're going to talk about all that more in a moment. Another big thing that happened this year was test optional. So the test optional movement has been gaining steam for a while. And, as you can see, the New York Times said more than 500 colleges and universities have adopted test optional policies this year. So before that, ACT had reported that half of four-year colleges were test optional before the pandemic, and another 30% transitioned to test optional practices during the pandemic. So that's about 80% of colleges now, 4 years colleges out there, that are test optional. And I'll say from my experience, pretty much almost every school that is on the national radar, those schools are test optional, except for the Florida state schools. The Florida state schools the Florida system said, no, we are not going test optional, and they have not been. But almost every other school that my students apply to has become test optional. And so you can see that in previous years, 77% of applications were submitted with a test score. So that's last year, 77% were submitted. This year, only 44%. So it went from over 3/4 to now under half of students are submitting test scores. And so their ACT reported a decrease of 20 to 30% in students sending test scores from last year. And then, what's going on moving forward. So where I say this has the most implications for your families moving forward is that at least 1,360 four-year colleges have already announced that they will not require SATs or ACTs for the upcoming application cycle. And this really goes with the trend that once colleges tend to experiment with test optional, a lot of the times they'll keep that policy. So will all of these schools ultimately that have gone test optional stay test optional? No, some will go back. But I'm going to anticipate that probably more will stay test optional than not if they find that they're still getting strong applicant pools, especially because this is also increasing their applications and the amount of applications that they're getting, which means they're potentially getting some stronger students. Okay, so why test optional? Why has this been a movement? And I want to emphasize to you that the admissions offices, I go to conferences, the National Association for College Admissions Counseling brings together thousands of high school and college counselors like myself and thousands of admissions officers and staff. And a lot of it focuses around issues of equity and access, and test optional is a big movement in our field. And it's one that you wouldn't necessarily assume being a parent because all you hear about standardized tests. Even most of the colleges wish they were test optional. They understand the value of it. And that's because, well, so this year, part of the reason that so many colleges went test optional is the limited availability. Obviously, in the spring, most test centers were closed at crucial times for testing, and this past fall as well. And then I know my students were only able to take the SAT because we had SAT school day. Otherwise, my students who weren't able to make it to campus, my international students who were still abroad, were not able to take the test. But now, even as things are opening back up, many test centers continue to be closed, and the ones that are open all have reduced capacity due to social distancing guidelines. So whereas desks only needed to be 4 feet apart before, now they need to be 6 feet apart. And so that's less, desks per room. Therefore, you need more rooms, more proctors. There's just not as many seats available as there were before. And so that limited availability is what drove this massive, trend of going test optional. But like I said, other reasons from before why it's an issue, low income, first generation, underrepresented populations, they already tend to do lower on test scores, and they're being disproportionately affected by COVID. And so, why is this? Beyond the fact that things that we've already discussed, their schools are less funded. They have less funding in these schools. So they're maybe not able to learn as much and, gain as many skills as schools that are smaller and better funded. They have less test prep opportunities. So, I know I worked at a school where we had a test prep class built into our curriculum. So all of our students were getting some sort of test prep. Also, these students, low income, first generation, underrepresented populations, their families can't afford to get tutors and to have exams or to have test prep classes. And so, that impacts their score because a lot of the SAT is not so much the content, but knowing how, and the ACT is how to take the test. And also these populations have fewer parents who understand the system. Most of them don't, their parents didn't go to college. And so they don't know that, the SAT is something you should have preparation for. Maybe you should study for it. You should take it more than once, things like that they just don't understand the system. So a lot of issues with equity and access there. But also for the families that aren't necessarily, in those populations, there's a lot of test anxiety. I mean, a lot of students are just not good test takers. And especially, I have students who aren't good test takers on just any test throughout the year, let alone a test that they feel is going to determine the rest of their lives in terms of what college they can get into. There's a lot of pressure behind those 4 hours on a Saturday morning determining your future. And so these are all just some of the many reasons why this test optional movement has been quite strong for quite some time and getting stronger. Next screen.
So Rebecca, oops, can you see? Okay. I just wanted to mention, because somebody commented about it, and that we're not just focusing on highly selective schools. Like, that's not the purpose of the presentation. It's really unfortunately, but that this time of year, most of the data that is out there is just available from the highly selective schools because most of them have like the early admissions programs. So, and so that's where we're starting to see the trends. And it is likely that the trends that we're seeing from early decisions will follow through from regular decisions, but that's the only reason why you might see a lot of the highly selective schools named here. It's just, that's where we have the data from.
But it also drives my later point, which I'll make later, is that like, yes, the issues and a lot of the stress that's going on right now, and hopefully will be my main point at the end, is for these highly selective schools. And I want you to understand, as I'm sure you will later on, that it's not like there's really not as much of a need to stress because there's so many other schools out there where these issues aren't as pressing. And we'll get into that, but that's part of why I highlight these schools, because I want you to see that these schools are already highly selective and they're just becoming more highly selective. So the rich are getting richer, essentially. It's that kind of mindset. So now, what has test options? How has that played out so far? Now, like Debbie said, the only data we really have, because we're right now, early decision and early action data has come out, but we do not have regular decision data yet. And so, early action and early decision data comes out in December and January and February. So we've gotten that data, but we're still waiting on the regular decision. So there is no data from these other schools. It's still happening. Colleges are still in committee, still working this out. But for the schools that have released data, which once again, they're not very transparent right now, because they're still all trying to figure everything out. But University of Pennsylvania said that, so their early decision acceptance rate this year, this is current data, is 15%. And they had a 23% increase in early decision applications over last year. And of those applicants, 38% of them, so, a good chunk, over a third, applied test optional, but under a quarter of the students that they accepted applied test optional. And so you can see that it's not consistent with the percentage of students that applied that got accepted test optional. So more students that applied using tests got in than those who didn't. With Georgetown, it's the same thing. So they had an early action acceptance rate this year of 11%, but their test optional acceptance rate, so of all the students that applied test optional, only 7% of those got accepted. So obviously the acceptance rate for students who did submit test scores was higher than that 11%. So there's two implications from this. One that I honestly, from what I've seen with my students, is that most of the strongest students are, and then probably the one that these colleges are going to make an argument of, of test optional, and maybe not having those numbers being equal, the percentage that applied test optional and the percentage accepted, is that most strong students are also strong test takers. And I'm not saying this is a definitive thing, because I'm sure there are many people in this, live right now who have strong students who are not good test takers. But from my experience, and I've, been a college counselor now for a decade, and in my experience in working in lots of different settings, for the most part, the students who are my strongest students also are the ones who have the strongest test scores. And there is always one or two students that's an anomaly, but for the most part, it's consistent in that way. And you'll see in my next slide that the numbers really do play out that way. And I think that can be somewhat supported in the numbers that I show. But then it also could imply that colleges are not truly test optional. I mean, these colleges, unlike colleges in the past who chose to go test optional because it was something that they really wanted to do and it meant a lot to them, these colleges were forced into it, whether they thought it was the right thing or whether their peer institutions were doing it. And so, they had to be test optional, and they were in some instances, and it did allow for some more applications to come in that they wouldn't have gotten otherwise. But really, we don't know quite how test optional they truly are. So if we look at the next screen, I guess I get to my ED numbers a little bit later. So this year, there's also a record number of applications. So there was an 11% increase in overall applications this year, but only a 1% increase in applicants. So you can see that students, while yes, there were a few more applicants than previous years, there were a significant more amount. And you can see that there's a 9% increase in the average of applications per student to 5.8, which is a little shocking to me because I had very few students who only applied to 6 schools. Most of them applied to more, but I'm seeing a significant amount more applications. I had one student apply to, I think, over 30 schools, which I would never condone or recommend. Thank goodness all I have to do on my end for those schools is press send with her supporting documents. But it's gotten really outrageous, especially for students applying to those top tier schools, because there's just so many students applying that they just feel like they need to get cast a wide web, and it's causing really a lot of issues. But there has actually been a 1.6% decrease in first generation applications. So these are students who neither their mom or dad or neither parent graduated from a four-year college. There's also been a 13% increase in international applications, less from China this year, which is the country that typically sends the most, but more from everywhere else in the world. And of those international students, and this is something that also plays a factor in the drop of enrollment for this year, a lot of the drop of enrollment in large part are international students who couldn't make it here and couldn't come. And that's really affected a lot of universities, because the international students, for the most part, tend to be more full pay students than the domestic students. They don't qualify for the federal student aid. And so a lot of them, unless they get institutional aid, have to pay the full amount. So that has really impacted the finances of a lot of these colleges, which is why you'll see a lot of colleges cutting a lot of programs or consolidating programs. But you'll see that these international students this year, 13% increase in applications. There's a 24% increase to the larger schools, the larger and more selective private schools. So you'll see schools like BU, NYU. Those were probably my two most popular schools at my high school this year, which my high school is 50% international. So a lot of students applying to those schools. And then you'll also see there was a 22% increase towards smaller selective private schools. So a lot of those little Ivies like Amherst and Williams and Swarthmore, those types of things. So this information all came from the Common App. And you'll see that these are just some of the numbers. Like I said, not many have reported, and so far it tends to be only the highly selective ones that really report. But Colgate University, a small college in rural New York, they had a 103% increase. They more than doubled their applications this year over last year. Harvard had a 42% increase, and you can see the numbers going down. Even large state schools, so you can see Berkeley and UC Berkeley and UCLA had a 28% increase, and the UC system, a very highly prestigious system, had 16% increase. So in the New York Times, Jeff Salengo, that author I mentioned earlier, said that Ivy League schools had to add an extra week just to consider their influx of applicants. So typically, they'll report by one of the last days in March, and then they will have decision day. May 1st is the national decision day. The Ivy League schools have said, we're letting people know the first week in April. We need an extra week because they've just had so many more applications that they need that extra time to look them over. And so they're going to be releasing their decisions the first week in April and and then waiting until the first, full week in May for that decision day. So highly selective colleges are really the ones that have had this increase in applications. As you can see, about 17% increase in applications for highly selective schools overall. So size does matter when it comes to this, whether a college is getting more applications or not. So overall, there's been a 16% increase of applications for the largest universities, so over 20,000 students. So if we look, right, I live in Pennsylvania. Penn State University had an 11% increase in applications. Temple had a 12% increase in early action applications and projecting a 4% increase overall. So the large flagship schools in a state, meaning the main universities within a state, they're doing well. They're doing fine. They're not, applications are going up. You are going to see a decrease. So there's a 4% decrease in applications for the smallest colleges. So most of the colleges in the country, a lot of those colleges that don't have the names that people know of, a lot of them are under 1,000 students. They've had a decrease in applications. And then the increase has, there have been numbers going up, but you can see in the Southwest, there's been a larger increase than in the Mid-Atlantic. And, you look at the size of the schools. In the Southwest, there's fewer schools, but they're larger. In the Mid-Atlantic, there's a lot more schools, but they're smaller. So you're seeing consistencies within these numbers. All right. And then a lot of smaller name schools are struggling. So you have those large schools, but the less selective colleges, down 10% in applications this year. Small colleges that are less selective, the small colleges, but the less selective privates have an increase in applications this year. sorry, I have some numbers a little messed up here, but the smallest colleges, things have gone down. And some, like the State University of New York system's a really great example because they have 4 flagship schools. They have Binghamton, Buffalo, Albany, and Stony Brook. And while Binghamton, you can see their numbers have gone up 2% this year, overall system-wide, outside those 4 flagship universities, they have a lot other smaller and medium-sized schools that don't have as big names, and they have overall had a 14% decrease. You can see that, a system that has a lot of lesser known schools is not getting as many applications. Same with California State University. You saw the UC schools had an increase, but the Cal State University, which is less selective than the UC schools for the most part, has seen a 5% decrease. And Cal Poly Pomona, they have a 40% decrease in applications. So that's really significant. And other, lesser known, Portland State has 12% decrease. They're not the main school in Oregon. University of Oregon is. So Portland State had a decrease. Loyola University of Maryland, a small liberal arts college in Baltimore, in the suburban part of Baltimore, had a 10% decrease. And this is pretty consistent with a lot of those smaller liberal arts colleges throughout the Mid-Atlantic, which I've talked to and had heard about decreases.
Okay, here's your early decision results.
Yes. So this is the implications, for those things. So how have these been playing out with, more applications? What has that meant, right? And this is kind of playing in with what we talked about earlier with early decision. So as you can see here, these are all colleges where I've had data from last year, and then they've also reported data for this year. I have their ranking. And you'll see Davidson has liberal arts college. The rest are national universities. They're on different ranking scales with US News, but that's why I have it written out. But you'll see that all of them have a significant increase in applications for their early decision round. And so you'll see that, anywhere from 12% increase to 36% increase. And you'll see in the far right column that the change in acceptance rate for all but one of them, all but Boston College, actually their acceptance rate for early decision went down this year. But what you'll notice in that middle column is that even though most of their acceptance rates went down, they did increase the number of students that they admitted through early decision. It just wasn't enough to make, to be consistent with the acceptance rate. And so what that tells me, the implications of this are kind of go back to what I was saying with test optional, and that more students applied because test optional meant that they didn't have that barrier, that gate that was saying, okay, you need this test score to be able to be admissible. So a lot more students applied thinking that they had a chance. But in reality, most of those students were not going to be strong enough anyway. And so you can see that while, yes, they did accept more students this year, there were the handful of students that did get accepted more this year than last year that maybe were those test optional students. Overall, it wasn't enough to make the acceptance rates consistent. The one thing you can see with the acceptance rate, I think it's really interesting with Boston College. If you look at that, their rating, other than Villanova, is the lowest out of all of these. And what I would say an implication there is that they're competing with these other top tier schools generally for applicants in the regular decision round. And so their acceptance rate going up can be indicative of the fact that they want to secure more students. They want to yield more students, meaning they want to enroll more of the students that they accept. And this is a way to do it through the early decision round. So they, knowing that they're competing for students with these other top schools, accepted more during the early decision round because so much is unknown this year. So a lot, yeah. Okay. And then early action. So early action schools, unlike early decision, and I'm sorry I didn't clarify this earlier, early decision school applications are binding. Typically it's a November 1st deadline, and you need to apply, and you apply to one early decision school and say, I want to apply to you. If you accept me, I am committing to attending. And those schools, so that's where applying early can help, especially in a year with so much uncertainty like this year. Early action, it's an early application. You apply in November generally, but it's not binding. You're not saying that I promise to attend if enrolled. So they have less incentive to accept you because you could still get accepted and then not go there. And so if you look, Harvard and Yale say REA SCEA, that's restrictive early action, single choice early action. That's because they have a policy where you cannot apply to any other private school through early action. So while they're not binding, they are restricting you from applying to other private schools through other early action programs. So you can see here, though, that for the most part, non-restrictive early action programs admitted fewer students through early action than previous years. And that's because they're seeing that increase in application, and ultimately they want to keep their options open. They're saying, look, we're getting a lot of really great applicants this year, and we don't need to fill up our class, use all of our acceptances early when we have that many more coming. And the numbers you're not seeing here, you're seeing acceptances, but you're not seeing what the other numbers are. So some of these numbers are, some of the students who don't get in are denies, but a lot of them are going to be deferrals, deferring them to the regular decision round because they want to just keep their options open.
Sorry, here we go.
Okay, but all of this might stress you out and feel like, okay, all these colleges have way more students applying and not nearly enough spots available, and test optional isn't quite what it seems. What am I going to do? How am I going to move forward? But the great news is that there are so many attainable colleges with really outstanding student experiences. So I'm going to just go over how you can kind of look for those colleges and understand, ways to identify them and why they might be just as good, if not better, than some of these other top tier schools. So as I mentioned before, I've talked about Jeff Slingo. He just came out with his book, Who Gets In and Why, and it is really an outstanding book. I have a 2-hour commute 2 days a week out to my school because I live in Philadelphia, and I listen to it on audiobook. I wish I had a hard copy so I could have written in all my notes. But one of the concepts he talks about are sellers and buyers. And the sellers of all these colleges, for the most part, that we've talked about so far, are sellers. They're the haves in admissions. Clearly, they have it all. They're getting lots of applications. They are not hurting for applications this year. And they needed to extend their deadlines because of it, or their deadlines and their decision days and their notification dates because of it. And they don't need to buy students with tuition discounts. So many of these schools are not merit scholarships at these schools, but they do. A lot of the top tier schools meet need-based aid to the truly exceptional students that can get in. So if you can make it in, if you can be that 2% that gets in regular decision to Penn, then you qualify to be able to go, and they will make it affordable for you through financial aid. So those are the sellers. Then there's the buyers, and most colleges, I'd say maybe 100, probably only like 50 colleges in the US or so. 50 to 100 colleges are actually sellers. There's over 4,000 colleges in the US, and so most of them are buyers. And these are the have-nots in admissions. So these are where admissions officers need to go to college fairs. They need to go to high school visits. They need to work to get as many students to apply to their schools as possible. And then when they do accept students, because they tend to have higher acceptance rates, when they do accept students, they discount the tuition. So that number that you see creeping up every year, that's getting 70,000 range, 80,000, getting into the 80s now. It's absurd. Those colleges are those colleges, the ones that are really at the top of that, will meet full need if you can get in. But the colleges that are $50,000, $60,000, $1,000 a year, almost all of them will have significant tuition discounts through merit aid. And so, because they ultimately want to fill their beds, and they want to try to steal you away from those colleges that meet full need. And also, I want to emphasize that full demonstrated need is not necessarily the same as demonstrated want. So your expected family contribution might be $20,000 a year, even if you're only prepared to spend $12,000 a year. So those colleges that say they'll meet full need will bring it down to your need of $20,000, but then you have $8,000 that you're not necessarily prepared. These buyers cost less and to give merit scholarship and need-based aid. So sometimes those colleges can be competitive when it comes to prices. So how do you identify these schools? So, just to go over the US News rankings, I was talking a little bit earlier about there's different lists. There's the National University list. So schools like, Harvard and Yale and University of Pennsylvania, University of Virginia, Michigan, those schools are national universities. But then there's the smaller liberal arts colleges where they focus much more on the undergraduate experience, like Amherst and Williams and Middlebury and Rhodes and all those colleges. those are the liberal arts colleges. And so they actually on US News are in different rankings, which is why you'll see that Princeton and Williams or Amherst, I forget which one is this year, are #1. And it's because they're on 2 different ranking scales. Those are the ones that people tend to focus on here in the US. But they don't place too much of a focus on the actual student experience. But US News does have a number of other rankings on their website that does focus more on that student experience. And so I looked at those to kind of try to understand what schools could be really great options and better options in some ways than others.
Oops.
Oh.
Sorry.
Sorry. No. Okay. So I call them, this isn't what they're called, but I call them the US News Experience Rankings. And these are based off of faculty and expert surveys of reputations, because professors move from different colleges and they're always in contact with other professors and researchers in other colleges. And so they know a lot about the reputations of other schools. And so these are based off of those surveys. And there are rankings in lots of different categories. So undergraduate teaching, really focusing on where it focuses on teaching more, teaching undergraduate students rather than maybe working with graduate students. Innovative schools, social mobility. So this is where do a large proportion of disadvantaged students actually enroll and graduate. First year experience programs that make your first year experience a stronger one. Co-ops and internships. I know that when I graduated college, there were, no one was doing internships. It was something like very rare. And now with, after the economy tanked in 2008 and there were no jobs, people realized we need to have internships in college. And so that has been a huge boom in the past, 15, 12 years, I guess, since then. Learning communities. So where do they have these opportunities where students can live and take classes, living learning communities a lot of time, where they'll take linked classes and they'll get to know each other and a professor well so they can keep the discussions going outside of the classroom. Where are there capstone projects such as, a thesis or a big project or dissertation, something like that. Service learning, where does volunteering get intertwined into the curriculum? Study abroad. Almost every student says they want to study abroad. What schools have strong study abroad programs? Research, that's so huge. It's such a big experiential learning opportunity. And at so many colleges that are known for being research institutions, all the research opportunities go to graduate and doctoral students. And so where do undergraduates get that experience? And writing, right? I'm sure any of the parents here, I know me as a professional, writing is one of the most important skills you can have. Where is writing a really big part of the curriculum? So these are all rankings that I think, are really worth looking at. And you'll see in a moment how I look into them further. So Princeton Review has similar type rankings, except those are based off of student surveys versus the faculty surveys of the US News. So you can see the rankings here. So I'm not going to read through them, but you can see them all as well. And then next screen. So what I did was I took those rankings. I'm a big spreadsheet person. Anyone who knows me knows I'm a really big spreadsheet person. And I looked at all those rankings. So you can see in the first column, it's what category for US News they are, what their overall ranking is, the name of the college, and then their acceptance rate. And then I have all the columns, which I expanded, but I contracted so I could see the colors. And I put what their ranking was in all the different categories that I just showed you. And then if they were in the top 25, if they were in the top 10, I highlighted it blue. They were in the top 25, I highlighted it green. If they were in the top 50, I highlighted it yellow. And then I gave 3 points for every blue, 2 points for green, 1 point for yellow, because I wanted to see what school had the highest index. It's my own personal methodology. It's by no means scientific, but it was just my way of trying to identify what colleges really had high rankings in a lot of those areas. And you can see this is the list here. And you can see there's a lot of different kinds of colleges. And I'm going to really use Elon as an example, but then I'm going to show you a few others that you can consider. And just as a way for you to just look at colleges differently and identify those schools that are not as highly competitive. So I say Elon's like the Ivy or medium alternative. And really, if you look, they were, for almost every category that they had rankings for, they were in the top 20. And if you look at, so you could see all the different categories they were in the top 20. If you look over to the right, you can see their US News ranking is 88. Their acceptance rate is 78%. Although I will say Elon did get 2,000 more. I called them up. They got 2,000 more applications this year than last year. But that overall, so yes, I do anticipate their acceptance rate is going to go down, but if it's going down from 78, it's still going to be attainable for many students. For students who are considering an Ivy League school, Elon is going to be absolutely attainable, and they should have no problem getting in if they are if they are strongly considering an Ivy League school because they're a strong student. Elon, according to Jeff Salingo, is an extreme buyer. And he says this because while they only meet 58% of financial need, 49% of their total financial aid money that they have to give away is given in merit scholarships. So they are giving a lot of merit scholarships to students to try to bring their tuition rate down. And I'll tell you, $54,000 for a total cost for a university for a private university is one of the lower numbers. And then if you think that they're bringing it down with need-based and merit-based aid, it does go down even more. It's still a lot of money. I'm not saying it's not, but it could be, comparable to a lot of the other packages that you're getting. And then if you look at the overlap schools, so these overlap schools came from the Fisk College Guide, which is an awesome college guide if you haven't seen it. And so these are the colleges that have the most cross applications with Elon, and you'll see that every single one of the colleges has a higher rank, significantly higher rank than Elon does. And they also have significantly lower acceptance rates. So Elon is that anomaly in this group, but they have, a much lower rank and much higher acceptance rate. But then if you look over at the other rankings that we have here, and you look at where those peer institutions fall, some of them you'll see like learning communities, not one of those colleges that the overlap schools were on any of the rankings for the learning communities. They were not on that ranking. They didn't even make the rankings. They didn't make the ranking for co-ops and internships. But, for where they did make the rankings, so for example, for the study abroad, where it's ranked #1 for both US News and Princeton Review, Richmond was #4 and William & Mary was #8. Neither of them ranked as highly as Elon. And if you look across all the rankings, none of the colleges rank as highly as Elon in any of the categories, except for overall satisfaction with Princeton Review. But still, it was on the Princeton Review Top 20, so it still means they have overall satisfaction. So this just goes to show that in many ways, Elon is a much better university in a lot of ways than these really highly regarded top-tier institutions. And so I'm not going to go into the details. It's the similar slide for the next few, but if you're looking for more of a humanities-focused small liberal arts college, St. John's is a really great option. It's a small liberal arts college in they actually have 2 campuses, one in Annapolis, Maryland, the capital of Maryland, and one in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And they follow the Great Books curriculum. So all of their classes are taught using the Great Books. And so if they're learning about science, they'll be reading a book about science from back when, I don't even know, way back in the day, hundreds of years ago. So it's a really interesting curriculum. If somebody's a reader, somebody really likes reading, then it's a school with highly intellectual students and faculty members who are just super accessible. And so that is definitely a college to consider if you're interested more in the humanities. If you're interested more in STEM subjects, the College of Wooster has some really great options. And as Debbie's pointed out to me before, Wooster actually will they'll let you, before you apply, reach out to them and say, what kind of merit aid or what kind of financial aid package do you anticipate that I'll get? They're one of the few colleges that do that. So that's really great. And you can see that once again, their rankings, and it's, a lower ranking, but higher acceptance rate than many of its peer institutions. And they have a lot of really strong STEM programs. So they're in Ohio. And then large universities, Arizona State, I visited, and they were so proud. They're on my tour there. They said, we're the #1 most innovative college. That's more than MIT, is what they were saying to me. And it's really, they have an outstanding honors program. So even if they're large campus size, which is very large, even if that is something that is too, big for you, they have one of the best honors colleges in the country. So it's definitely worth checking out. And it's in, it may be in Arizona, which may not be close by to especially a lot of the East Coast families, but it's in Phoenix, which is, I believe, the 5th largest city in the country. So a lot of opportunities there. And, as you can see, if you look at the overlap schools, it's really much higher ranked in a lot of areas than all these other schools. Michigan is its biggest competition, and Michigan is way more selective So definitely a great opportunity there. Interested in women's college, for those of you who have girls, I looked at all the selective women's colleges in the country, and then Agnes Scott is in Atlanta. Well, it's in Decatur, so right outside, and ranked very, very highly. I think it was number 2 on my index of colleges that have over a 45% acceptance rate that were in the rankings. And then finally, technological universities. So if you're thinking MIT, Caltech, or engineering colleges like Harvey Mudd or Olin, they really tended to rank very highly. U.S. News doesn't really rank them; they're not ranked on U.S. News. But with Princeton Review, they were on almost every list, and you can see that they were competitive, if not, beating out all these other schools on those Princeton Review lists. So definitely worth checking out. So just to summarize kind of everything that we discussed, 22% of incoming freshmen basically decided not to enroll this year, or it's 22% fewer freshmen this year than previous years. And so that has impacted things and indicates potentially lower acceptance rates for this class of 2021. Test optional has made colleges more accessible for underrepresented populations. That's something I actually did not talk about as much in detail. But one thing that the test optional did allow is that, those students who are from underrepresented populations that might not have had those test scores for the reasons we discussed now actually can apply to these colleges. And I would bet, and I can't say for certain, but I would bet in those increased number of acceptances that you're going to see a higher proportion of those underrepresented populations. It's still, not making up for the amount that have not had access in the past, but it's a step closer, and that is a big issue within college admissions. But I think what test optional has mainly done is it's increased a false sense of admissibility to a lot of students. And so, most colleges students can get into in the country, but those highly selective colleges, they're going to be really hard regardless of whether you have strong test scores or not. And not all colleges may be as test optional as they say they are, and that's just something we're going to have to see. Remember, not every college wanted to go test optional. A lot were forced into the situation, but we just don't know yet. A lot of it is just we're waiting and seeing. Applications have increased to the highly selective colleges and the large flagship universities due to the uncertainty in test optional practices. So that is something just to be aware of. I hope it goes down for my sake because I have a lot more applications to deal with this year. And then early decision results at top tier colleges indicate that test optional helped a few, but not most. And that when building your college list, really consider those buyer alternatives. I highly recommend looking at Jeff Slingo's book. And I think Debbie's going to talk about some series she's doing with Jeff Slingo as well. And he talks about a lot of great things in his talks and in his book. I highly recommend every family buy that book.
Okay, well, thank you, Rebecca. And you guys can leave questions. We're going to do go through some questions. I think I tried to answer a lot of them as they were coming through, but if you have more specific questions, put them in the chat now. And as I mentioned actually at the beginning, this is just like a sample of the types of topics, the depth of the information we go into, the insights you can get if you want to participate in the concierge program that we run. And we have it open for the next few weeks. I will tell you, I'm going to skip ahead. So the special offer that Rebecca was referring to is what we've recently been doing a lot of work with Jeff, which is great. And so we do think that the book is so important for families to have that we are including it as part of the people who enroll in the concierge program. So you'll get a free copy of the book and you'll get a free special session with Jeff, not you one-on-one, but you with everybody else in the concierge program. So that will be really insightful. And so let me skip back and tell you guys what is the concierge program. So we do live monthly coaching, just kind of like what you just went through. So we'll take a topic and we'll go in depth. I mean, Rebecca, do you want to discuss?
So I just before this, literally, if I lost my voice, it's because we just did like an hour-and-a-half workshop just before this on building the college list and demonstrated interest. Last month, we did one on letters of recommendation. It's something that a lot of students might feel is like the thing that's most out of their control with the college admissions process. And I really gave a workshop on, why those recommendations are important, what colleges are looking for, and how the student can drive the narrative of their own recommendation, and gave them strategies for that I've used with my students that teachers have actually thanked me for. And the month before that, I know we did how to choose your classes for senior year, and I talked about concepts of rigor curriculum and GPA and things like that, and how colleges view those as well. So we go a lot of detail, a lot of data. I'm very big on data.
Right. I think the difference, and maybe a lot of what we do than maybe other things out there, is that I think college admissions is a combination of, I want to say science, but it's not really science, but it's a combination of data and an art form. So, and it's marrying those two pieces of information and kind of figure out insights from it, and then figuring out how those insights apply to your specific situation. And that's exactly the type of level of detail that we do in the concierge. So it's a coaching session. We actually have a tool called College Insights, which has a lot of detailed information about merit scholarships and the colleges that give the merit scholarships. So you get access to that. There's office hours where if you have questions that you can ask those specific questions, you can send in emails with your questions. And it's all designed really to give you whatever level of support you need. But then if you want a little bit more, if you need some extra like one-on-one, you can get what we call a la carte services. So if you want to have a brainstorming session with your student to figure out their essay topics, or if you want to have somebody really review your college list at a level of detail that Rebecca will, that's the type of services that are available in the a la cartes. So just wanted to put it out there if anybody is interested in that. But let me get to, I'm going to just change the screen. Let me get to some of the questions, Rebecca, that people are asking.
Great.
Hold on. There was one up here. Any thoughts? And, this isn't necessarily I think an implication from this year. This is probably in general. What about, does going early decision impact merit offers?
So a lot of the times colleges will say that, sometimes they'll incentivize you and say, yes, we'll give even more money on merit. I think it depends on the school. Obviously, for those more highly competitive schools, they meet full need. I hate to say it, but with a lot of things in college admissions, it depends. So for some schools, it might impact merit offers positively because they want to incentivize people to apply early decision. The other thing that to be aware of with early decision is that while it is binding, if you do find that it is not affordable, that is a reason to back out of that early decision agreement. It's not good. It doesn't look good to back out. It's not good for you. It's not good for your high school. It's something we definitely I try to make sure my students are aware that they should be only applying if they think it could be potentially affordable, because that could impact them accepting students from our school in the future, and do unto others as you'd want done to you. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, if it really truly is unaffordable after whatever financial aid they give you, you technically can back out.
And Rebecca, actually, somebody asked that earlier, and I kind of responded with the same thing. But I will only add to that particularly at the schools that are offering early decision, their net price calculators are pretty accurate because they don't give merit. So what messes up a lot of net price calculators is the uncertainty and the change from year to year of how the schools are going to give out merit. But for the schools that are going early decision, a majority of them aren't giving merit, and so their net price calculators are pretty accurate. So if you have any concerns, actually everybody should do the net price calculator before applying any place early decision, and really that is going to be very close to the package that you're going to be offered. Okay, so along similar lines about merit scholarships, if you go test optional, are you still eligible for merit scholarships?
Yes. So if a college is committed to being test optional, the harder part is getting into the college. If they've committed with test optional, it's harder to get in test optional, at least from what we're seeing so far, than not, although some colleges really truly are test optional. But even for those that aren't, even for Penn and Georgetown, as they've committed to be test optional, they will have different matrices. So instead of having, a y-axis with your GPA and your x-axis with your test scores and having financial aid depending on that, they'll have other ways to categorize it. So if a college is committed to being test optional, then they're committed to their merit scholarships being test optional as well. And they have other ways to gauge what gets you merit scholarships. Typically, it'll be the rigor of curriculum, your GPA, the grades you get in your class, and maybe how many extracurricular activities you're involved with, leadership, things like that.
Okay, here's another topic, and this is actually something that Rebecca went into depth, on a monthly session, but maybe you can just kind of give the highlights of about this question.
So unfortunately, there's not enough resource. Like when I was working for an IB school, one of the things I wanted to do, I petitioned the IB to like create a position for me to create kind of like a search engine on the IB that really reached out to schools and identified what their typical predicted grades were and the scores for the IB that they accepted. There's not data out there for that. Unfortunately, for other countries, there are. If you look at if you want to go to the UK, they'll have the minimum IB score that you need. Unfortunately, there's not that data out there for the US. But in terms of the diploma, the IB diploma, it's very highly regarded. It is seen as a very rigorous curriculum because essentially you're taking, if you're doing the IB diploma, especially, which includes the 3 high-level classes, 3 standard level classes, you're essentially taking 6 AP classes and 6 honors classes over junior and senior year, which is a lot. And so that's kind of, colleges see that, and they also know that you write the extended essay, which is a research paper that most high school students are not writing. And so the diploma is very highly regarded, and obviously the higher the score, the better. So I'd say there is no official conversion chart, but I always say like a 7 is an A+, a 6 is like an A 5 is like a B+, 4 is like a B, 3 is like a C, and then anything under 3 is like D, 2 is a D, 1 is an F or something. There's no official conversion. That's just kind of how I always looked at it. And so it's just kind of the best way I can say to look at it. But in terms of how GPA and weighting, every place is different. And this is what Debbie's talking about, where I go into very detail in my workshop. I talked about the GPA and what that means and why it's important or not important. And what I always say, focus more on the rigor of curriculum. So the amount of, is the student only taking a few IB classes, or are they taking the full IB diploma? And are they, what IB classes are they taking within the diploma? Some are like environmental science, unfortunately, is not seen as, highly regarded as the other sciences. And so, what level math are they taking? Things like that. But generally, if they're taking the IB diploma, that's the golden standard for high school curriculum around the world.
Okay, Rebecca, somebody is asking
huge IB fan.
is to put your crystal ball hat on, and let's make any thoughts about what students are going to do this year for gap years.
I don't think there's going to be as many.
I don't think so either. Yeah.
I don't think there's going to be as many. I think that especially because we've had not normalcy for so long, like people just want to go back to normal, and they want like that normal college experience. And I think for the most part, all the vaccines are, 18 and older. So, people going into their freshman year of college should be able to get the vaccine. And so I do think like it's not obviously we're going to be in a new normal, but I think that that's going to be kind of as close to a new normal as possible. So I do think that, and I also think that a lot of gap years, people can't necessarily afford them. Gap years can be expensive unless they're getting a job and working. Gap years typically cost money. If you're going to do a gap year program or travel or something like that, that all costs money. And it's just an additional year of most often parents having to pay for it on top of college. And so I think that a lot will just go to college. I'm hoping there won't be as many applications. I think that some of the panic will subside, but I do think that with test optional, I think there will be more applications than previous, but maybe hopefully not as many as this year. It's hard to say though, because we're still in the middle of this year.
Okay,
I wish I had more answers.
Here's another question about predictions. Is there an expected drop in the total number of seniors for 2022? But will students continue to apply to 15 to 20 colleges next year? I think that's the more important question. And how are colleges figuring out their yield with kids applying to so many schools?
Yeah. So, will they continue applying to 15, 20? I mean, I already had students applying to that many. So I think it depends on the school. I think like I'm at a small, boarding school. It's very college prep focused. And so, I think at those types of schools, you're going to have those numbers any year. I would say, I hope it goes down a little. I think there's going to be a little less uncertainty, but it might be, there might be some trickle effect from this year. How are colleges figuring out their yields? Part of it is we don't know yet because we haven't gotten regular decision results yet. The only results we've gotten are early decision and any rolling admissions, but those still aren't complete results. And rolling means that they open up their application in August and you can start applying, and then they'll start letting you know within like 6 to 8 weeks of submitting your application. I just had a virtual visit from University of Pittsburgh the other day. They do that. And so if you're interested in University of Pittsburgh, they open their application on August 1st. If you apply, they start reviewing applications after Labor Day. And so if you apply before Labor Day, you can get a result oftentimes by the end of September. But once again, we don't have the full admissions results from Pitt until, May or so April, May. So it's hard to say. I think what I'm seeing a lot from early decision is a lot of them deferred the students. And I would not be surprised if there's more waitlist students this year. To kind of have that wait list. I had a student who was I've had a number of students be waitlisted from early decision instead of being deferred. And so that I think they're really increasing their waitlist numbers. So that way, once they see how many seats they fill, they can go to their wait lists.
Okay, here's another good question. Do you think admissions will look at these factors differently for the class of 22 due to the pandemic's impact? Things like extracurricular, teacher recommendations,
yes.
All the things that they're just not normal this year for the class
absolutely.
of 22.
I mean, it's funny. The one thing I say about this is, this has been one of the most isolating times in my life. I'm single, living alone during the pandemic, but it's also been for me one of the most unifying times because everywhere in the world, everyone is going through it. And like, I have friends all over the world. I used to work in Barcelona. I have friends, my brother lives in Israel. I know people all over the world. Everyone is going through this. And so everyone understands. And unlike, socioeconomics, where you might not really be able to understand what somebody's going through, like everyone understands COVID. And these admissions officers know, and they know there's a range. They know like small private schools like mine have been open, but even those we've had things that are different. And, half my students are remote and half are in person. And, so that's where there is a little COVID essay that you can write to kind of express how COVID's impacted you, if it has. And so you can do that. But then I would encourage students to not use it as an excuse to not do anything. There are a lot of things you can do from online. I'm a big fan of massive online open courses, and colleges, especially the more selective ones, want to see that you're intellectually curious. And you don't necessarily need to go to a summer program and spend a lot of money to get those experiences. And there's massive online open courses on websites like Coursera and edX. And any topic you can look into and, research and take college classes that are offered by Harvard, Cambridge, Penn, Northwestern. Like, I've seen all of those colleges on there offering free online classes, often at an introductory level, and they're for free. And so you can take those classes, sometimes earn certificates, and really dive into your interests. And I found that colleges, especially these highly selective colleges, don't necessarily want well-rounded students. They want a well-rounded student body. And so if you have an intellectual interest, take some free online classes in the area, devote some time, see if it actually is what you want to study. And if it is, continue to take those classes, build an expertise, because then you're going to bring that perspective to the classroom that not necessarily everyone else in the class has.
Okay. For the non-Ivy League schools, is early action recommended in order to increase likelihood for scholarships?
I would say yes, absolutely. Because oftentimes they have a certain amount of money that they can give for merit scholarships. So like we explored with Elon, 49% of the financial aid that they offer is for merit scholarship, and they have a pool. That 49% is an actual number, and that number gets eaten into. And so the earlier you apply, the more likely you are to get scholarship. If they've given out all that money or most of that money in the early action round, then they're not going to have as much money to give later on. So yeah, absolutely apply early action, get those merit scholarships.
Rebecca, somebody's asking for the names of the websites for the MOOCs.
Coursera, so C-O-U, C-O, my gosh, my brain is fried. Coursera.
Yep, I typed it in.
And edX, that one's easy, EDX. They're both fantastic. I honestly, like with almost every one of my students, I sit down, I'm like, all right, what do you want to study? Or I ask them what their favorite subjects are, and we talk about their favorite subjects. And then I say, what have you done outside of the classroom that's related to those subjects? And if they haven't done anything, or even if they have, I say, let's look. And we look up their intended major or their favorite subject and look at all the classes that are relevant. And there's such cool classes on there. And I've had to, and while it won't show up on your transcript, and you won't put it in your list of classes that you're taking that year, you do have an activity section on your application. And in it, you can say, massive online open courses, and then in the description you can name the courses that you took through whatever college. And so you're not getting credit, but sometimes they might have an essay question saying, what are some outside learning opportunities, or what's the way you've learned outside of the classroom, or why are you interested in your major, or something like that. And if you can talk, oh, I'm interested in my major because I took 3 massive online open courses in philosophy, one on happiness, one on Buddhism, one on, like if you can come with one on niche or niche, however you pronounce it, Nietzsche or what, you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, if you can talk about those and say, not just name drop them, but explain the significance to you and how it's impacted you, then that will just make for a more compelling reason that you want to study that major.
So Wendy's just asking, and I've seen this like too.
Yeah.
Does it matter the certificate option or the free class?
I would say no.
Yeah.
I would say no. Just because colleges aren't checking them, they're never going to be like, we want to see the certificate. That's not something that they accept. I think it's more like you say, you do it, and you should do it, but be prepared, especially if it's a highly selective college. You're going to want to talk about that, and it might be something. It's going to be great content for other things, and if it's not on any of the supplemental essays, then, as a question, tell your counselor about it, or your teacher of that subject, if they're writing a recommendation, say, I did these courses, this is what I got about it. In class, talk about it. So if you're taking, a massive online open course about heredity, and you're talking about, Punnett squares in biology, raise your hand and say, I took a class through Yale and they told me this, and this is, contribute to your conversation. And then the teacher can say, oh, they're really active contributor to my class, and part of the reason they were able to do this and become so knowledgeable because they took this class and they studied outside the classroom. So that stuff can come across in other ways throughout your application. So
I think this was great. I feel like, Rebecca, we're going to do not a redo, but we're going to do another session when all the numbers are in from regular decision. We'll do like a recap because, I think
summer sometime.
Yeah. But it'll be interesting to see kind of like if what we saw early decision really, comes through in regular decision, and again, just kind of what the numbers are from regular decisions and what the applications are going forward. So I thank everybody for hanging in there. We were on for over an hour, and a lot of people watched to the end. So thank you very much. Thanks, Rebecca, for all of her data skills and insights. And this is recorded, so come back and watch it. I did put in the comments, if anybody wants a summary that you should send, you can send me, but it's really easy to send through a Facebook message to the Road to College page. Send me your email address and we'll send you a summary of what we talked about tonight. And if anybody, again, wants kind of like more of this on an ongoing basis, look into the concierge service. So we're going to have enrollment open till March 21st. And then we're going to start digging in with all the families who join and make sure that they're ready for the summer, because we want to make sure that you can get as much done before school starts in September.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.